The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when Catherine Brennan arrived at Range Complex 7. The air tasted of pine and cordite, that particular North Carolina mixture that had become as familiar to her as breathing. Fort Bragg at dawn was a world unto itself, a place where shadows still held dominion, and the only sounds were the distant rumble of diesel engines and the soft crunch of boots on gravel. She parked her truck in the contractor lot, third space from the left. Always the same space. Routine was survival. Routine was invisible armor. Kate stepped out carrying her equipment bag, clipboard, industrial staple gun, replacement target paper rolled tight in waterproof sleeves. She wore simple khaki work pants and a gray contractor polo, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything beyond what the identification badge clipped to her belt declared: maintenance contractor, range operations. That was exactly the point. The range stretched before her like a cathedral of violence. 1,600 meters of carefully graded earth, dotted with target stands that rose from the ground like skeletal sentinels. Behind her, the control tower loomed, its polarized windows reflecting the first pale hints of dawn. She could see a silhouette up there, Colonel Aldridge, watching. He was always watching. Kate began her morning ritual. First target stand, check the hydraulic stabilizer. Second stand, verify the servo motor housing. Third stand, replace the worn target paper with crisp, new sheets. The staple gun made satisfying mechanical thunks as she worked, each sound echoing across the empty range. Most people would see monotony in this work. Kate saw preparation. Every target she hung was a potential life saved downrange. Every malfunction she prevented was an operator who wouldn't fail when it mattered. She understood the sacred geometry of this place, the mathematics of trajectory and wind, the brutal calculus that separated the living from the dead. Her hands moved with unconscious precision, muscle memory from thousands of repetitions. But these weren't the movements of a contractor. They were the movements of someone who had spent years handling weapons with the same care, the same reverence. Anyone who truly knew what to look for would see it immediately. The way she cleared each work area before moving, the constant environmental awareness, the economy of motion that spoke of tactical training burned so deep it had become cellular. The wedding ring hanging from a chain around her neck caught the first rays of sunlight. She paused for just a moment, touching it through her shirt. Captain David Morgan, United States Marine Corps, killed in action, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. March 15th, 2019. 5 years, 4 months, and 12 days ago. Kate exhaled slowly and returned to her work. The pain had become something she carried differently now. Not lighter, but integrated. A weight she had learned to distribute across her entire being rather than letting it crush her heart. Colonel Aldridge had taught her that, among other things. The rumble of a diesel engine announced his arrival before she saw the vehicle. The range master's truck pulled up beside the control tower, and Rick Aldridge stepped out, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose body remembered every hard landing, every forced march, every wound that had earned him a Purple Heart he never wore. He was 67 years old and looked like exactly what he was, a man forged in fires that most people couldn't even imagine. His face was all angles and weathered leather, his eyes the pale blue of winter sky. He wore the same thing every morning: faded jeans, a black polo shirt, and a ball cap with a simple trident pin. No rank insignia, no unit identifiers. Men like Rick Aldridge didn't need to advertise their credentials. "You're early," he called out, his voice carrying across the range with that parade ground authority that never quite left men of his generation. "Sleep is overrated, sir," Kate replied, not looking up from her work. "That it is." He approached carrying 2 paper cups of coffee, steam rising in the cool morning air. He handed her one without ceremony, black, no sugar. "How's the equipment looking?" "Target stand 7 has a loose mounting bracket. I'll tighten it before the range goes hot. Stand 12 needs new servo motor. The bearing's starting to grind. Rick nodded, sipping his coffee. This was their morning ritual, had been for 9 years now. Two warriors pretending to discuss maintenance while really checking in on each other, making sure the night hadn't left any fresh wounds that daylight needed to dress. Big day today, Rick said quietly. SEALs coming in for a workup. Some VIP demonstration scheduled for this afternoon. I saw the range reservation. Team leader is a young lieutenant named Holloway, Marcus Holloway. Rick paused and something flickered across his face. Memory, perhaps, or recognition. His father was one of mine, James Holloway. Trained him in '90 before Desert Storm. Hell of an operator. Kate heard the unspoken words in that statement. Was. Past tense. The son might not be what the father was. I'll make sure I'm clear of the range when they arrive, she said. No need for that. You've got work to do. This is your range as much as theirs. Rick's voice carried a note of something harder now, something that sounded almost like anticipation. Besides, might be educational. Before Kate could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching from the main road rolled across the complex like distant thunder. Not the practical work trucks of contractors or the standard military transport. These were tactical vehicles, heavily modified SUVs with a kind of aftermarket equipment that screamed special operations. Right on time, Rick murmured. He touched Kate's shoulder briefly, a gesture of reassurance or perhaps solidarity. Remember what I taught you. Let them underestimate me. It's a weapon. Smart girl. He smiled, the expression carving deep lines around his eyes. Then he turned and walked back toward the control tower, his gait still carrying the ghost of the ranger stride he'd learned 50 years ago. Kate returned to her work, but her awareness expanded outward like a radar pulse. Every sense came online, cataloging details, assessing threats, building a tactical picture. It was automatic, instinctive. You could take the soldier out of the war, but you couldn't take the war out of the soldier. 3 vehicles, black SUVs with darkened windows. They pulled into the staging area in perfect formation, spacing that spoke of convoy discipline. Doors opened in synchronized precision. 6 men emerged, all wearing the casual uniform of the elite operator. Tactical pants with more pockets than any human needed, moisture-wicking shirts that displayed physiques sculpted by obsessive physical training, ball caps and sunglasses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But it was the way they moved that told the real story. These were SEALs, naval special warfare operators who had spent years having it drilled into them that they were the absolute apex predators of the military food chain. They moved with the casual arrogance of men who had never encountered a problem they couldn't shoot, blow up, or physically dominate. The team leader was obvious immediately. He was the tallest, the loudest, the center of gravity around which the others orbited. Lieutenant Marcus Holloway stood 6'3" and carried himself like a man who had never been told no in his entire life. His jaw could have been carved from granite, his shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. He wore his sunglasses pushed up on his forehead like a crown, and when he spoke, his voice carried the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. All right, gentlemen, let's get set up, Holloway announced, gesturing broadly at the range. We've got senators and DOD brass coming at 1400 hours. This demonstration needs to be absolutely flawless. We're talking precision at 1600 meters, which means we need perfect conditions and 0 distractions. His team began unloading equipment, rifle cases that cost more than cars, spotting scopes worth thousands of dollars, ammunition in custom loads that had been precision manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Everything was top of the line, state of the art, the kind of gear that only unlimited black budget funding could provide. Kate continued working on target stand 14, about 50 meters from where the SEALs were setting up. She might as well have been invisible. None of them so much as glanced in her direction. To them, she was part of the landscape, furniture, irrelevant, beneath notice. It was perfect. One of the younger SEALs, a petty officer with a kind of sculpted beard that took more maintenance than most people's lawns, did finally notice her. He nudged Holloway, gesturing with his chin. "Lieutenant, we've got a civilian on the range." Holloway turned, his gaze sweeping over Kate with a kind of dismissive assessment that lasted perhaps half a second. In that instant, he cataloged her, categorized her, and filed her under "not important." "Sweetheart," he called out, his voice dripping with casual condescension. "You lost? The administration building is back on main post. This is a live fire range. It's going to get loud and dangerous out here." Kate didn't respond. She finished stapling the corner of the target she was hanging, smoothing it down with her palm to eliminate any wrinkles that might affect the silhouette. Only then did she turn, meeting Holloway's eyes with her own steady gaze. "Understood," she said. Her voice was low, even, carrying no more inflection than the morning wind. Then she turned back to her work. The word hung in the air. Not an argument, not a defense, not an explanation, just acknowledgement. It was the verbal equivalent of a stone wall, perfectly smooth, offering no purchase for further engagement. Holloway's expression shifted slightly. It wasn't quite irritation yet, more like puzzlement. He was a man accustomed to reactions, deference, fear, attraction, something. Her complete lack of engagement registered as abnormal, and abnormal things bothered men who lived in a world of rigid protocols and clear hierarchies. "Did you hear what I said?" His voice was louder now, performing for his team. "This is special operations work. We're about to conduct precision rifle training that requires absolute focus. We don't need civilians wandering around like they're at a craft fair." Kate picked up her roll of fresh targets and her staple gun, preparing to move to the next stand-down range. She walked with the same calm, unhurried pace, her movements economical and purposeful. She didn't look back at Holloway. She didn't acknowledge his existence beyond that single word. It was, from a tactical perspective, the most devastating response possible. She had reduced him to irrelevance in his own mind. The team members exchanged glances. Something felt wrong about this interaction, though none of them could quite articulate what. They were trained observers, men whose survival depended on reading subtle cues. And this woman, this quiet, unassuming contractor, had a stillness about her that was somehow profound. She didn't move like someone nervous or intimidated. She moved like someone who was completely, utterly comfortable in her own skin and in this environment. Holloway felt it too, though his ego interpreted it as disrespect rather than what it actually was. His jaw tightened. He took 3 steps toward Kate, his boots crunching on gravel loud enough to be heard across the range. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Kate stopped, turned slowly. Her face remained neutral, registering his presence with the same detachment she might give to weather or terrain. She waited, just waited. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "Look," Holloway continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something to a particularly slow child. "I don't know who you are or what you're doing here, but I know what you're not. You're not one of us. This is a world of precision, of violence, of a level of skill you can't possibly comprehend." He gestured at his team, at their equipment, at the range itself. "We're out here preparing to do things you only see in movies. We're dealing with ballistics calculations that would make your head spin, windage adjustments over 1,000 meters, spin drift, Coriolis effect. We're not just shooting guns, we're conducting surgical strikes on targets at distances most people can't even accurately estimate." Kate's expression didn't change. She simply listened, tracking his face with an intensity that should have been a warning. She saw everything, the slight overextension in his posture that spoke of insecurity being masked by aggression, the way his hands moved when he talked, seeking to claim territory and dominate space, the tightness around his eyes that suggested a man trying very hard to live up to an impossible standard. Do you understand the difference between what we do and what you do? Holloway pressed, warming to his subject now, his voice rising to ensure his team could hear every word of this performance. You're out here with a clipboard and a staple gun, making sure paper hangs straight. We're calculating for atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients, the rotation of the Earth itself. Every shot we take represents 10,000 hours of training. Every trigger press is backed by a sacred trust, a legacy of warriors that goes back decades. He paused, letting the words settle, then gestured to one of his team members who was uncasing a magnificent rifle. Petty Officer Martinez, show her what a real precision instrument looks like. Martinez brought over the rifle with reverent care. It was a Barrett MRAD, multi-roll adaptive design, chambered in .338 Norma Magnum. The stock was carbon fiber, the barrel free-floated in match grade, the optic a Schmidt Inventor scope that cost more than most people's cars. It was a masterpiece of engineering, a tool designed for one purpose, delivering death with mathematical certainty at extreme distances. This, Holloway said, his voice dropping to something almost reverent, is $15,000 of American engineering excellence. This rifle can put rounds through a dinner plate at 2,000 meters. It represents the absolute pinnacle of precision marksmanship. It's not a toy. It's not something you just pick up and figure out. It's the result of decades of ballistics research, metallurgy, optical science. It's a promise, a legacy, a sacred trust. Kate looked at the rifle. For the first time, something flickered across her expression, a shift so subtle that only someone watching very carefully would catch it. It wasn't awe or intimidation. It was something deeper, recognition, familiarity, the way a master carpenter might look at a well-made hammer or a concert pianist might regard a Steinway. It was the look of someone seeing a tool they knew intimately. This micro-expression was completely lost on Holloway. His worldview had no category for it. He saw what he expected to see, a civilian intimidated by the display of professional equipment and expertise. So when I ask you to clear the range, he continued, satisfaction creeping into his voice, it's not because I'm being rude. It's because you're literally in the way of something important, something that matters. This demonstration today, senators are going to be watching. Defense appropriations are on the line. National security decisions will be influenced by what happens on this range. And I can't have some contractor wandering around while we're trying to work. Kate's gaze shifted from the rifle back to Holloway's face. How long is your demonstration scheduled for? She asked quietly. The question seemed to catch him off guard. What? Your demonstration. How long? 1,400 hours to 1,600 hours. 2 hours. Kate nodded once. I'll be done with my maintenance checks by 13:30. You won't see me. She turned to leave, but Holloway wasn't finished. The lack of engagement, the complete absence of deference, had gotten under his skin like a splinter, working its way deeper with each passing moment. That's it? That's all you've got? No questions about what we do? No interest in the reality of special operations? Kate paused, her back still to him. I understand what you do, Lieutenant. Do you? Do you really? Holloway's voice was sharp now, genuinely irritated. I don't think you do. I don't think you have any concept of the level of training, dedication, and sacrifice required to wear this uniform. To earn this trident, he tapped the SEAL insignia on his chest. This isn't something they hand out. This is earned through blood and pain and more hardship than most people will ever know. From the control tower, Colonel Aldridge watched through high-powered binoculars. He could read the scene like a book, could see the trajectory of this interaction as clearly as if it had already happened. He'd witnessed this exact dynamic play out dozens of times over his long career. Young operators, full of themselves, convinced that their recent training and their expensive equipment made them the deadliest things on Earth. Quiet professionals who knew better, who had nothing to prove because they'd already proven everything that mattered. This was going to be educational indeed. On the range, Kate finally turned back to face Holloway fully. "You're right, Lieutenant. I don't know what it takes to earn a SEAL Trident." Her voice remained neutral, factual. "I'm sure it requires exceptional dedication." It should have been a concession, a moment of agreement that would allow Holloway to feel vindicated and move on. But something in the way she said it, the absolute lack of emotion, the clinical delivery, made it feel somehow worse than an argument would have. She was agreeing with him the way you might agree that water is wet or gravity exists. A simple statement of fact that carried no weight because it was too obvious to matter. Before Holloway could formulate a response, a high-pitched mechanical whine cut through the morning air. It came from downrange, from the farthest target complex at 1,550 meters. The sound was wrong, grinding metal and stressed hydraulics, creating a cacophony that any experienced range operator would immediately recognize as catastrophic failure. All heads turned toward the sound. One of the advanced robotic target systems, a running man rig designed to simulate moving enemy combatants, had seized mid-cycle. The metal silhouette was frozen at an awkward angle, tilted approximately 30 degrees off vertical. A thin wisp of smoke curled from its actuator housing, dark against the pale morning sky. The range master's voice crackled over the loudspeaker system. "Hold the line! Hold the line! We have a malfunction on Target Complex 6. All personnel, cold range. I repeat, cold range. Stand by." Holloway's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, frustration, and then calculation. This was a disaster. The VIP demonstration was scheduled in less than 6 hours, and the primary target system just failed. Maintenance teams would need hours to diagnose and repair, assuming the parts were even available. His team gathered around him, their casual confidence replaced by professional concern. These men knew what was at stake. Defense appropriations, program funding, their unit's reputation, all of it rode on this afternoon's demonstration. "Range Control, this is Lieutenant Holloway, SEAL Team 5, he said into his radio, his voice crisp and commanding. "We can fix that. Give me permission to put a round into the actuator housing. A .338 Lapua Magnum should knock it loose. We can have that system back online in 2 minutes." It was a typical SEAL solution. Direct, overwhelming, relying on brute force to solve a technical problem. It was also remarkably stupid. A stray round could destroy the expensive track system, damage the control electronics, or create a dozen other cascade failures. But it would be fast, and it would look decisive. The range master's response came through laced with skepticism and barely concealed irritation. "Negative, Holloway. That's a $400,000 system. We're not having you use it for target practice. We'll send a maintenance team downrange. Range is cold for a minimum of 3 hours." 3 hours. The words landed like a death sentence. There was no way to complete the demonstration setup and rehearsal in the time remaining if they lost 3 hours now. The VIP demo would be compromised, possibly canceled. Everything Holloway had been planning for the past month was crumbling. 3 hours, he muttered, his jaw clenching. Unfucking believable. Can't these contractors maintain anything properly? He turned, looking for a target for his frustration, and his eyes landed on Kate. She was still standing there, still holding her clipboard and staple gun, still radiating that infuriating calm. "See?" he said, gesturing at the smoking target downrange. "This is what I'm talking about. This is the kind of problem we deal with. It requires dynamic solutions, immediate action, tactical thinking, not something you can fix with a staple gun and a prayer." Kate had stopped looking at Holloway. Her attention was focused entirely on the malfunctioning target, her head tilted slightly as she studied the distant silhouette. Her eyes moved with methodical precision, tracing lines and connections that were invisible to everyone else. She wasn't looking at the problem as a barrier to be overcome. She was reading it like text, understanding its language. The silence stretched. Holloway waited for some response, some acknowledgement. When none came, his frustration crystallized into something sharper. What? No witty comeback? No contractor wisdom to share? Kate spoke without looking at him, her voice carrying across the range with unexpected clarity. You'll shatter the servo housing if you hit the actuator mount. Everyone froze. The servo's not the problem, she continued, still studying the distant target. The primary issue is the retaining bolt on the forward hydraulic coupling. It's sheared. The pressure from the pneumatic actuator is creating a torque load on the chassis, which is binding against the guide rail. That's what's causing the seizure. The sheer technical specificity of her diagnosis stunned the assembled SEALs into silence. This wasn't a guess. This was an assessment delivered with the unshakable confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. The kind of certainty that came from deep knowledge, from having seen this exact failure before, from understanding the mechanical systems at a level that went beyond what any normal contractor would possess. Holloway stared at her, his mouth slightly open. How could you possibly know that from here? That target is over 1,500 meters away. You can barely see it without optics. Kate finally looked at him. She pointed downrange with one hand, her finger tracing invisible geometry. The shadow underneath the chassis is misaligned by approximately 3 degrees. You can see the slight torsion shimmer on the main support arm where the stress is concentrating. The hydraulic line shows a pressure bulge just before the coupling. That's backflow from the failed seal. The bolt has to be the failure point. It's the only component under sufficient shear stress to create that specific deformation pattern. It was breathtaking. She was reading stress patterns on metal from over a mile away, diagnosing a mechanical failure with the kind of precision that would require most people to be standing right next to the equipment with diagnostic tools and a manual. She was seeing things that shouldn't be visible to the naked eye, interpreting subtle visual cues that most trained technicians wouldn't catch. Holloway felt something shift in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation that took him a moment to recognize as doubt. His voice, when it came out, was sharp with defensive sarcasm. Right, and I suppose you've got a magic solution to fix it from here, Miss Clipboard? The mockery was thick, but underneath it ran a new thread: uncertainty. He was a man watching his assumptions crack, and he was fighting desperately to shore them up before they collapsed entirely. Kate met his eyes with that unsettling directness. I could fix it, but you'd need to let me use a rifle. The statement hung in the air like a challenge, like a blade being drawn. Holloway laughed. It was a harsh sound, forced. Oh, this is rich. You're telling me you can fix a mechanical failure at 1,500 meters with a rifle shot? What are you going to do? Shoot it really hard and hope something unsticks? I'm going to hit the sheared retaining bolt at the coupling joint. If the bolt head is removed, the chassis will drop back into alignment. The actuator can then override the binding. You're going to hit a bolt head, that's maybe an inch across. At 1,500 meters, in variable wind. Holloway's voice was dripping with theatrical disbelief. Lady, I don't know what you've been smoking, but professional snipers spend years learning to hit targets that size, at that distance, under perfect conditions, with custom ammunition and world-class equipment. Yes, Kate said simply. They do. Holloway's team had gone completely quiet. They were watching this interaction with the fascinated horror of people witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Something was very wrong here. The quiet confidence in this woman's voice, the technical precision of her analysis, the complete absence of doubt, it all added up to something that didn't fit their model of the world. One of the petty officers, a man named Davidson, who had been doing this long enough to trust his instincts, leaned close to Holloway. LT, he said quietly, maybe we should. No, Holloway cut him off. His pride was fully engaged now, his ego erected like battlements against the approaching truth. He couldn't back down. Backing down would mean admitting he'd been wrong. And men like Marcus Holloway built their entire identities on being right. He looked at Kate with an expression that mixed pity and mockery. All right, sure, let's play this game. He turned to Martinez. Give her your rifle. Martinez hesitated, clutching the expensive Barrett like a parent protecting a child. Sir, this weapon is... I said give it to her, Holloway snapped. Let's let Miss Contractor show us all how the professionals do it. This should be entertaining. Martinez reluctantly brought the rifle over, handling it with reverent care. He held it out to Kate like he was presenting a religious artifact, his expression making clear he expected her to fumble it, to be intimidated by its weight and complexity, to reveal herself as the amateur she obviously was. Kate set down her clipboard and staple gun with deliberate care. She reached out and took the rifle. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. The moment the weapon settled into her hands, something fundamental shifted. The quiet contractor vanished, and in her place stood something else entirely. Something ancient and formidable and absolutely certain. The rifle, 13 pounds of precision engineering, seemed to become a part of her, an extension of her will made manifest in carbon fiber and steel. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency that spoke of thousands of hours of repetition. Her left hand slid under the forestock, fingers finding purchase with unconscious precision. Her right hand curled around the pistol grip, index finger resting perfectly straight along the receiver, well clear of the trigger guard. She worked the bolt with a smooth, practiced motion. The chambered .338 Norma Magnum round ejected in a flash of brass. Without looking, without breaking her focus on the weapon, her right hand came up and caught the cartridge in midair. The movement was so casually perfect, so absolutely controlled, that several of the watching SEALs actually gasped. Kate looked at the cartridge in her palm, then raised her eyes to Holloway. This is overkill, she stated flatly. The concussive force could damage the hydraulic control circuits. Do you have an alternative load? A .308 NATO would be better for this application. The technical specificity, the casual weapons handling, the complete absence of hesitation or uncertainty. Every single SEAL on that range felt it simultaneously. A creeping realization that something very, very wrong was happening to their understanding of reality. Holloway's face had gone pale. His mouth opened and closed twice before words came out. Martinez, he said, his voice sounding distant and hollow, give her a .308 magazine. Martinez fumbled in his gear bag with shaking hands. He produced a magazine loaded with 7.62 by 51 millimeters NATO rounds. Match-grade precision ammunition. He handed it to Kate like he was offering tribute to a deity he just realized existed. Kate took the magazine, examined it briefly, then slapped it into the magazine well with a firm, resonant click that echoed across the suddenly silent range. She worked the bolt again, chambering around with a sound that seemed impossibly loud. Her movements were textbook perfect, every action economical, purposeful, efficient. She didn't use the bipod, didn't go prone. She simply dropped into a kneeling position, her body settling into the stance with the kind of perfect balance that spoke of countless hours in this exact posture. It was a modified rice paddy squat, a shooting position that was exponentially harder than prone, but offered greater flexibility and faster target transition. The rifle came up to her shoulder, the heavy stock nestling into the pocket of her shoulder like it had been molded specifically for her body. Her cheek met the stock, her eye found the scope, and she acquired a sight picture in less than 2 seconds. Her breathing slowed, became almost imperceptible. The entire range, the entire world, seemed to hold its breath with her. From the control tower, Colonel Rick Aldridge watched through his binoculars. A small smile touched his lips. There she is, he whispered to himself. There's my ranger. Holloway stood frozen, unable to look away. The joke had curdled in his throat. This wasn't a joke. This was something real. something terrifyingly competent. This woman, this contractor who he dismissed as irrelevant, was demonstrating a level of weapons proficiency that matched or exceeded anything he'd seen from professional operators. Kate's world had narrowed to the scope picture. 1,550 meters downrange, she could see the malfunctioning target system in perfect clarity. She identified the coupling joint, the sheared bolt head, the exact point of failure. She calculated for wind, 8 miles per hour, 3 o'clock. Temperature gradient, rising air creating a 2-minute vertical shift. Barometric pressure, standard. Coriolis effect at this latitude, negligible for this distance. The math happened automatically, instinctively. Her body made micro-adjustments without conscious thought. This was what years of training looked like. This was what it meant to have fired so many rounds that the rifle became an extension of your nervous system. She exhaled slowly, smoothly, half a breath. The perfect moment existed between heartbeats, in that instant of absolute stillness when the body was a stable platform and the world held perfectly still. The rifle cracked, a single, sharp, clean report that was utterly distinct from the usual cacophony of range fire. It wasn't a roar, it was a statement, final and absolute. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, 1,550 meters away, something impossibly small, no bigger than a man's thumb, violently separated from the target assembly. The sheared bolt head, freed from the immense torsional pressure, spun away into the dirt. The target chassis snapped back into alignment with an audible clang that carried back on the wind. A second later, the actuator motor whirred back to life, and the running man target began to glide smoothly along its track as if nothing had ever been wrong. The silence that followed was profound, absolute. It was the silence of men who had just watched their entire understanding of the world get rewritten in real time. Kate stood up. The movement was as fluid and controlled as her kneel had been. She worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing. She held the rifle out to Holloway, butt first, barrel safely pointed at the ground. "Your weapon is clear," she said. Her voice was the same neutral, professional tone she'd used throughout this entire interaction. "The optic is approximately 0.3 mils right of true zero. You'll want to adjust that before your demonstration." Holloway took the rifle with numb hands. He stared at it, then at her, then at the distant target now functioning perfectly. His brain was struggling to process what had just happened, to reconcile the impossible shot he just witnessed with his assumptions about who this woman was. "How did you—" he began but couldn't finish the sentence. Kate didn't answer. She picked up her clipboard and staple gun, her movements returning to that same calm, methodical efficiency. She turned and began walking toward the next target stand, leaving Holloway and his team standing in shocked silence. The sound of an engine, immediate and purposeful, cut through the morning air. A utility vehicle appeared from the direction of the control tower, moving fast enough to kick up a small cloud of dust. It came to a halt just behind the firing line, and Colonel Richard Aldridge stepped out. Every person on that range, from the lowest-ranking SEAL to Holloway himself, immediately came to attention. Not because Aldridge was wearing rank insignia, not because he'd given an order, but because the sheer force of his presence demanded it. He was a man who'd commanded in Mogadishu, who'd led operations in Desert Storm, who'd spent 45 years in the service of his country. Authority radiated from him like heat from a forge. His eyes swept over the assembled men, taking in their shocked expressions, the still smoking target downrange, and the single spent 7.62 millimeter casing glinting on the asphalt. But his gaze came to rest on Kate, and when he looked at her, the hard authority in his face softened into something else. Respect, pride, recognition. He walked directly toward her, ignoring everyone else. When he stopped in front of her, he looked at her not as a colonel addressing a contractor, not as a superior to a subordinate, but as one warrior to another. "That was a hell of a shot, Sergeant," he said quietly. The word hung in the air. Sergeant. Not contractor, not civilian. Sergeant. Kate met his eyes. "The weapon has a good optic, sir." "It's not the optic," Aldridge replied, and the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And you know it. I haven't seen shooting like that since Mogadishu. October 3rd, '93. The date meant nothing to most of the watching SEALs, but to men like Aldridge, it was sacred. The Battle of Mogadishu, Black Hawk Down, the day that 18 American soldiers died in the streets of Somalia, and 2 helicopter pilots earned Medals of Honor. Aldridge turned to his aide, a young captain who'd followed him from the control tower. "Get on the net to J1. I want a personnel file check. Last name Brennan, first name Catherine." The captain looked confused. "Sir, she's a civilian contractor. She won't have a military file." Aldridge's eyes narrowed. "She will. Check the archived NCO records. Search for Sergeant Catherine Brennan, 75th Ranger Regiment." The title crashed into the assembled SEALs like a physical force. Ranger Regiment. Not just Army, not just infantry, the Rangers. The premier light infantry unit of the United States military. The unit that had jumped into Grenada and Panama, that had fought in Mogadishu and Takur Ghar, that had led the initial invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. Holloway looked like he'd been struck. The color had completely drained from his face. The captain spoke into his radio, his voice uncertain. Static crackled. Then a tinny voice responded from the other end. The captain listened, his eyes growing progressively wider with every word. He lowered the radio and turned to Aldridge, his expression one of pure, unadulterated awe. "Sir," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "File confirmed. Sergeant Catherine Brennan, 8 years of service, United States Army." He swallowed hard, reading from notes he was taking as the voice continued through his earpiece. "Last unit of assignment, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3rd Battalion, Bravo Company." The captain paused, gathering courage for what came next. Notable decorations include the Silver Star with oak leaf cluster, 3 bronze stars with V device for valor, Purple Heart, Combat Infantry Badge, Ranger Tab, Expert Infantry Badge, Distinguished Marksman Badge, President's 100 Tab. Each award was another hammer blow to Holloway's ego. These weren't participation trophies. These weren't political decorations. These were awards for courage under fire, for technical excellence, for being tested in combat and found exceptional. The captain's hand was shaking now. "Sir, there's more. Multiple deployments to Operation Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan, 2016, 2017 through 18, and 2019. The last deployment," he paused, checking his notes again. "Classification level is high. Mission details are redacted, but there's a notation." "Read it," Aldridge commanded. "Kandahar Province, March 2019. Team Ambush, 4 KIA including Unit Medic Captain David Morgan. Sergeant Brennan held defensive positions solo for 14 hours. Eliminated 12 enemy combatants. Provided overwatch for successful friendly force extraction under sustained fire. Awarded Silver Star, 2nd award." The silence was absolute. 12 confirmed kills. In a single engagement, while holding position alone after watching her fiancé die. The captain wasn't finished. Confirmed total career kills, 47. It's noted as the highest confirmed count for any female sniper in United States military history. He looked up from his notes, his face pale. "Sir, there's a final notation." Upon completion of 3rd deployment, Sergeant Brennan was offered a direct commission to 2nd lieutenant and assignment to special operations. She declined. She requested discharge and accepted position as civilian contractor, range operations, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Colonel Aldridge nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd known all along. He turned away from his aide and faced Kate directly. His back straightened. His posture became ramrod straight, and then he executed a salute. It was not the perfunctory gesture of military courtesy. It was slow, deliberate, and profoundly respectful. It was the salute one gives to a Medal of Honor recipient, the salute that says, "You are my better." "Sergeant Brennan," he said, his voice resonating with authority and respect, "it is an honor to have you on my range." Kate returned the salute with precision that was as crisp and clean as the day she'd first learned it in basic training. "Thank you, sir. Just trying to keep the equipment running." Her humility was perhaps the most shocking thing of all. Here was a woman who had proven herself in the most extreme circumstances imaginable, who had earned every accolade a soldier could earn, who had just demonstrated a level of skill that left professional special operators stunned. And her response was to deflect, to minimize, to return immediately to the quiet professionalism that defined her. Aldridge finally turned his attention to Lieutenant Holloway. The colonel's face transformed. The respect and warmth he'd shown Kate vanished, replaced by cold, hard disappointment. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. "Lieutenant Holloway." Holloway snapped to attention so fast he nearly gave himself whiplash. "Yes, sir. You wear the trident of a United States Navy SEAL. Do you know what that symbol represents?" "Yes, sir. Excellence, honor, and—" "It represents humility," Aldridge cut him off. "It represents the understanding that being elite is not about making noise. It's not about telling people how good you are. It's about being so goddamn good that you don't need to say a word." He took a step closer to Holloway, forcing the younger man to meet his eyes. "You looked at a decorated combat veteran, a woman who has forgotten more about precision marksmanship than you will ever know, and you saw nothing but someone to mock. You let your assumptions, your prejudice, and your ego blind you to the reality standing right in front of you." Holloway's face was crimson now, shame and humiliation warring for dominance. Aldridge gestured back toward Kate, who had returned to her work, checking the next target stand as if nothing remarkable had happened. "That woman has operated in environments so hostile you can't even imagine them. She has proven her worth in blood and fire. She has earned her place among this nation's greatest warriors through action, not through words on a practice range." He paused, letting the words sink in like hammer blows. "Your father, Lieutenant, was one of mine. I trained James Holloway before Desert Storm. He was a good operator. You want to know why? Because he was humble enough to listen, smart enough to learn, strong enough to admit when he was wrong." The invocation of his father hit Holloway like a physical blow. His father, his hero, the legendary SEAL whose shadow he'd spent his entire life trying to escape. "Your demonstration this afternoon will proceed as scheduled," Aldridge continued, "but Sergeant Brennan will be taking your place as primary shooter. Consider it a learning opportunity." The humiliation was complete and public. To be replaced in your own demonstration by the person you just mocked was the kind of ego death that most men never recovered from. "Do you understand me, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir," Holloway managed, his voice barely audible. "Good." Aldridge's expression softened slightly. "You're a skilled operator, Holloway. You have potential. But skill without humility is just arrogance. And arrogance gets people killed. Learn from this, grow from this, or the trident you're wearing will be nothing but jewelry." He turned and walked back to his vehicle without waiting for a response. Before he drove away, he called out to Kate one final time. 1300 hours, Sergeant. VIP briefing room. Bring your gear." Kate looked up from her work and nodded once. "Yes, sir." And then Colonel Richard Aldridge was gone, leaving behind a range full of stunned special operators and one very humbled SEAL lieutenant. Kate returned to her targets. She had 4 more stands to check before she was done. The morning sun was climbing higher now, burning off the last of the cool air. It was going to be a hot day. Behind her, she could hear the low murmur of voices, as the SEAL team processed what had just happened. She didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. She'd been through versions of this scene before. The shock, the disbelief, the rapid recalculation of assumptions. Let them talk, let them process. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the targets were hung correctly, that the equipment functioned properly, that when operators came to this range to train, everything was ready for them to do their jobs. That was her job now. Not glory, not recognition, just the quiet, professional work of keeping the machinery of war maintained and functional. She touched the ring hanging around her neck, feeling the warm metal through her shirt. 5 years, 4 months, and 12 days. "I'm still here, David," she whispered to the morning air. "Still fighting, still serving, just like we promised." The wind carried her words away across the range, across the 1,500 meters, where an impossible shot had just rewritten a lieutenant's understanding of the world, across the miles and years and all the distance between who she had been and who she had become. Somewhere in the control tower, Colonel Rick Aldridge watched her through binoculars and smiled. The student had become the teacher. The legacy would continue, and the morning work went on. The briefing room at Fort Bragg's Special Operations Command Building smelled of coffee, leather, and old paper. High-ranking officers had made decisions in this room for decades, decisions that sent men into darkness and brought some of them back changed. The walls were lined with photographs, faded images of Rangers in Grenada, Delta operators whose faces were deliberately blurred even in classified spaces, helicopter crews from operations that officially never happened. Kate Brennan stood at parade rest near the back of the room, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes forward. She'd changed from her contractor polo into something more appropriate, a simple black button-down shirt and khaki tactical pants. No uniform. Those days were behind her. But her bearing, her posture, the way she held herself spoke louder than any rank insignia ever could. The room was filling with people who mattered. 2 senators from the Armed Services Committee, their suits expensive and their expressions carefully neutral. A 3-star general from SOCOM, his chest heavy with ribbons that told stories of Panama and the First Gulf War. Defense contractors in business casual, clutching tablets and wearing the hungry expressions of people who saw opportunities measured in billions. And journalists, carefully vetted, security-cleared journalists who would write the stories that shaped public opinion and justified budgets. Lieutenant Marcus Holloway stood on the opposite side of the room with his team. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 6 hours. The cocky confidence had been stripped away, leaving behind something rawer and more honest. His eyes kept finding Kate, then darting away like he was looking at the sun. Colonel Rick Aldridge entered through the main doors, and the room's ambient noise dropped by half. He carried himself with the easy authority of a man who'd earned every bit of respect he commanded. His eyes swept the assembled crowd, cataloging, assessing, measuring. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice cutting through the remaining chatter like a blade. "Thank you for joining us today. What you're about to witness is a demonstration of precision marksmanship at extreme range. The purpose is to showcase the capabilities of our special operations training programs and the equipment that supports them." He paused, letting his gaze settle on each of the VIPs in turn. "The demonstration will be conducted by Sergeant Catherine Brennan, a decorated veteran of the 75th Ranger Regiment with 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan. Sergeant Brennan currently serves as a civilian contractor specializing in range operations and advanced marksmanship instruction." One of the senators, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, raised her hand. "Colonel, I was under the impression this demonstration would be conducted by Naval Special Warfare personnel." Aldridge's expression didn't change. "Plans evolve, Senator. When you have access to one of the finest precision shooters in the country, you use that asset. Sergeant Brennan's qualifications speak for themselves." He gestured to his aide, who triggered a presentation on the wall-mounted screen. Kate's service record appeared, heavily redacted, but what remained was damning in its excellence. Awards, deployments, qualification scores that sat at the absolute top of the scale. The senator nodded slowly, her eyes moving from the screen to Kate with new interest. Impressive. That's one word for it, Aldridge replied. Shall we proceed to the range? The group moved as a unit, flowing out of the briefing room and into waiting vehicles. Kate rode in the back of a utility truck with some of the support staff, preferring the anonymity. Through the window, she could see Holloway in another vehicle, his jaw clenched, his eyes staring at nothing. She felt no satisfaction in his humiliation, no sense of victory, only a kind of tired recognition that this scene played out over and over, in different forms, with different people. The assumptions, the dismissal, the eventual reckoning. It was exhausting in its predictability. The range looked different than it had at dawn. Tent canopies had been erected for the VIPs, providing shade and clear sightlines. Support staff had set up chairs, refreshment stations, spotting scopes on tripods. The whole thing had the feel of a sporting event, which made Kate's skin crawl slightly. This wasn't entertainment. This was the demonstration of skills learned in blood. Colonel Aldridge took position at the center of the VIP area, a microphone clipped to his collar. For this demonstration, Sergeant Brennan will engage targets at ranges from 800 to 1,800 meters. She'll be using a standard-issue precision rifle system with match-grade ammunition. All shots will be conducted in current wind conditions, with no artificial advantages. He gestured downrange, where target systems had been positioned at various distances. The targets include static silhouettes, moving platforms, and reactive steel. Each represents a different tactical scenario our operators might encounter in the field. Kate moved to the firing line. Someone had set up her equipment, a Barrett MRAD in .338 Norma Magnum, the same rifle Holloway had been using that morning. Bags of sand for support, a range card with wind and atmospheric data, everything she needed and nothing she didn't. She knelt beside the rifle, running through her pre-fire checklist with mechanical efficiency. Chamber clear, magazines seated, optic caps removed, bolt function smooth. These were rituals older than memory now, movements her hands could execute in complete darkness or under fire. First target, Aldridge's voice carried across the range. Static silhouette at 800 meters. Kate settled into position, prone this time, using the sandbags to create a stable platform. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to the scope picture and the mathematics of ballistics. Wind from the southeast at 6 miles per hour. Temperature 84 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure standard. Humidity low. The numbers processed automatically, her brain calculating holds and adjustments with the speed of long practice. The target appeared in her scope, a standard human silhouette, the kind used in qualification courses worldwide. She placed the crosshairs on center mass, exhaled half a breath, and pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The report rolled across the range. Downrange, the target erupted with the impact, the hit clearly visible even at this distance. Center mass, the range observer called out. Perfect hit. The VIPs murmured appreciatively. Kate worked the bolt, chambering a fresh round, and waited for the next call. Second target, moving platform at 1,200 meters. This was harder. A running man's silhouette on a motorized track, moving at approximately 4 miles per hour from left to right. She would need to lead the target, accounting for its movement, plus the wind drift, plus all the other variables that made long-range shooting more art than science. Kate tracked the target through her scope, her breathing synchronized with its movement. She saw the pattern, the rhythm. Everything moved in patterns if you watched long enough. She led the target by what her instincts told her was right. Not mathematics now, but feel, that deep knowing that came from repetition. The shot broke clean. The bullet's flight time at this range was just over 2 seconds. For that brief eternity, the round was in the air while the target kept moving, and every variable from temperature to the Coriolis effect played its part in the outcome. The impact was perfect. The target's center mass moving through space and the bullet's trajectory intersected with mathematical precision. Direct hit, the observer confirmed. Dead center. Senator Patterson, the woman who'd asked the earlier question, leaned toward her colleague. That's remarkable shooting. That's training and talent in equal measure, Aldridge replied, though the microphone wasn't meant to pick up his words. That's what happens when you take someone with natural ability and give them world-class instruction and the motivation to excel. Kate continued through the demonstration. 1,300 meters, static target in variable wind. 1,500 meters, multiple targets requiring rapid engagement. 1,600 meters, a steel plate no larger than a dinner plate. Each shot was perfect or near perfect. Her consistency was mechanical. The rifle had become an extension of her will, and her will was absolute. But it was the final shot that would be remembered. Last target, Aldridge announced, 1,800 meters, extreme range, wind conditions unfavorable. This represents the absolute outer edge of practical precision rifle engagement. 1,800 meters, just over a mile. At this distance, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 3 seconds. It would drop over 40 feet from the bore line. Wind would push it several feet laterally. The rotation of the Earth itself would have a measurable effect on the trajectory. Kate studied the conditions. The wind had picked up, now gusting to 10 miles per hour with variable direction. Heat mirage was creating visible distortion over the range. These were terrible conditions for precision work. She made her calculations, but more than that, she felt the shot. Years of experience whispered to her about holds and leads, about the way the wind would push the round, about the imperceptible tilt of the Earth, and how it would drift the bullet right. The rifle settled. Her breathing stopped. The world held perfectly still. The shot broke. 3 seconds of flight time felt like an eternity. Every person watching held their breath, eyes straining to see the distant target. The steel plate rang like a bell, the impact visible even at this impossible distance. The VIP area erupted in applause. The senators were standing. The general was nodding with the satisfied expression of a man whose budget requests had just been justified. Even the jaded defense contractors looked impressed. Kate stood, cleared her rifle, and stepped back from the line. Her expression remained neutral, professional. This wasn't about glory. It was about demonstrating capability, proving that the training programs and equipment worked, that the investment in special operations was sound. Colonel Aldridge approached her as the VIPs clustered around their vehicles, already discussing what they'd witnessed. Outstanding work, Sergeant. Thank you, sir. The senators want to meet you. Brief conversation, nothing formal. Kate nodded, though she felt a familiar dread settle in her stomach. She didn't do well with politicians. They asked the wrong questions and heard the wrong answers. Senator Patterson approached with her colleague, a man named Michaels who represented a district heavy with military installations. Both had the careful, practiced smiles of people who'd spent careers reading rooms and managing perceptions. Sergeant Brennan, Patterson extended her hand. That was extraordinary. Truly extraordinary. Kate shook the offered hand. Thank you, Senator, just doing the job. How long did it take you to develop that level of skill? It was the kind of question that seemed simple, but wasn't. How do you quantify the hours, the pain, the failures that taught more than the successes? How do you explain that the real learning happened under fire, when missing meant someone died? Ongoing process, ma'am. Started basic marksmanship in 2015. Been refining it ever since. Senator Michaels leaned in. Colonel Aldridge mentioned you served 3 tours in Afghanistan. What was your role there? The question carried layers. What he was really asking was, were you in combat? Did you kill people? Are you a real warrior or just a good shot? Counter-sniper operations, sir. Force protection. Target elimination when required. And how many successful eliminations would you say you achieved? Kate's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Colonel Aldridge noticed and stepped in smoothly. Senator, those operational details are classified. What I can tell you is that Sergeant Brennan's performance in theater directly saved American lives and contributed to mission success across multiple operations. Patterson shot her colleague a look that suggested he'd crossed a line. Of course, we wouldn't ask you to compromise operational security. She turned back to Kate. What are you doing now, beyond the contract work? Consulting on training programs, helping develop curriculum for advanced marksmanship courses, trying to pass along what I learned. That's admirable. Patterson's expression shifted, becoming more genuine. I lost a nephew in Kandahar, 2019. He was a Marine. The date hit Kate like a physical blow. March 2019, Kandahar province, the month David died. The month she'd held that position for 14 hours. The month she'd earned her second Silver Star and lost the person she loved most in the world. I'm sorry for your loss, Senator. Thank you. Patterson held her gaze. People like you, people who serve and sacrifice, you're the reason I fight for proper funding and support for our military. What you showed us today isn't just skill. It's the result of investment, training, resources. We need to remember that. It was probably a calculated statement, the kind of thing politicians said to connect with their audience. But there was something in Patterson's eyes that suggested genuine feeling, genuine loss. The senators moved on, satisfied with their photo opportunity and their talking points. The general spent a few minutes discussing technical specifications with the defense contractors. The journalists filed their stories on satellite uplinks, already spinning narratives about America's secret weapons and the warriors who wielded them. And Kate stood at the edge of it all, waiting for permission to leave, to return to the quiet work that didn't require performance or justification. Holloway approached her as the crowd began to disperse. He moved hesitantly, like a man approaching a dangerous animal. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her. Sergeant Brennan, can I have a moment? Kate turned to face him fully, her expression neutral. Lieutenant, I need to apologize, properly, not just because I was ordered to, but because I owe you that. He paused, seeming to gather courage. This morning, I was an arrogant asshole. I saw what I wanted to see instead of what was in front of me. I disrespected you, your service, and everything you've accomplished. There's no excuse for that. Kate studied him. The humiliation had stripped away the swagger, leaving behind something more honest, but also more fragile. This was the moment where she could either break him completely or give him something to build on. Apology accepted, Lieutenant. Holloway blinked, surprised by the simplicity of her response. That's it? What else do you want? I'm not going to make you grovel. You made a mistake. You owned it. That's more than most people do. He struggled with the words. How do you do it? How do you make those shots? How do you stay so calm? Kate considered the question. You want the technical answer or the real one? The real one. Fear, she said simply. I'm terrified every time I pull the trigger. Terrified of missing, of failing, of letting people down. But I learned a long time ago that fear is just information. It tells you what matters. You don't get rid of it, you use it. Holloway absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. My father, Colonel Aldridge, said he trained my father before Desert Storm. I know, the colonel told me. Did he tell you that my father died 3 years ago? Heart attack, sudden. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. I didn't know that, I'm sorry. Holloway's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. My whole life I've been trying to live up to his legend, trying to be the operator he was, to earn the respect he earned. And I thought that meant being the loudest, the most confident, the most dominant. I thought that's what strength looked like. That's what insecurity looks like, Kate said not unkindly. Real strength is quiet. Your father knew that, or he wouldn't have been the operator he was. Colonel Aldridge said the same thing. Holloway met her eyes. He offered to train me, him and you. 8 weeks, intensive. He said it's the same thing he did for my father in '90. Kate felt a flicker of surprise. Aldridge hadn't mentioned this to her. And you accepted? I did, if you're willing. She studied him for a long moment, seeing past the uniform and the ego to the core of the person underneath. She saw someone who genuinely wanted to be better, who'd been given a harsh lesson and was strong enough to learn from it. I'm willing, but you work for it. No shortcuts, no ego. You show up ready to learn, not to prove anything. I understand. Do you? Kate's voice sharpened slightly. Because this isn't about making you a better shooter, Lieutenant. There are 100 instructors who can do that. This is about making you a better operator, a better leader, a better human. That work is harder than anything you've done in SEAL training. Holloway straightened, and for the first time that day, his voice carried genuine certainty. I'm ready for that work. Kate nodded once. Then we start tomorrow. 0500, range 7. Bring your rifle and leave your ego in your rack. Colonel Aldridge's voice interrupted them. Sergeant Brennan, Lieutenant Holloway, my office, now. They followed him across the compound to the Special Operations Command Building. His office was Spartan. A desk, filing cabinets, a few photographs on the wall. One showed Aldridge as a much younger man, standing with a group of rangers in desert camouflage. Somalia, Kate knew, the one that changed everything. Aldridge settled into his chair and gestured for them to sit. I'm going to tell you both a story. Lieutenant Holloway, this is about your father. Sergeant Brennan, you haven't heard this part either. He leaned back, his eyes going distant with memory. 1990. Iraq invaded Kuwait in August. By October, we knew we were going in. I was assigned to train a group of Navy SEALs in desert operations and long-range reconnaissance. Your father, Lieutenant, was one of them. Holloway sat forward, attention absolute. James Holloway showed up with the same swagger you had this morning. He was good, naturally talented, physically superior, smart. But he had the same problem you do. He thought his natural gifts were enough. He thought confidence and ability were the same thing. Aldridge's expression hardened with the memory. 3 weeks into training, I put him through a scenario. Live fire exercise, hostage rescue simulation. He rushed it. Didn't read the environment. Didn't account for all the variables. His shot missed by 6 inches and hit a friendly role player. Simulation round, so no real harm. But in a real scenario, he'd have killed someone on our side. The silence in the room was heavy. I broke him down completely, made him start from absolute zero, taught him that skill without humility is just arrogance waiting to kill someone. Over 8 weeks, I rebuilt him as an operator. Not by making him a better shot. He was already a good shot. By making him a better thinker, a more patient warrior, someone who understood that the quietest professionals are often the deadliest. Aldridge's eyes refocused on Holloway. Your father became one of the finest SEALs I ever had the honor to train. He saved lives in Desert Storm because he'd learned to slow down, to think, to respect the complexity of combat. When you were born, he called me, said he wanted you to be better than he was. I told him that would only happen if you made the same mistakes he did and had someone willing to teach you through them. Holloway's eyes were bright. He never told me that story. Because he was humble enough not to. He didn't need you to know about his failures. He wanted you to find your own path. Aldridge turned to Kate. Which brings me to why you're both here. Sergeant Brennan, I'm offering you a formal position. Lead instructor for the Advanced Precision Marksmanship course. Military pay grade, full benefits, authority to design curriculum as you see fit. Kate's breath caught. Sir, Before you answer, hear me out. You've been hiding here for 5 years, playing contractor, keeping your head down, trying to disappear into the work. I understand why. Losing Captain Morgan was devastating. Grief needs time and space. But Kate, his use of her first name was deliberate, personal. You're too good to waste. The knowledge in your head, the skills you possess, they need to be passed on. Your generation of warfighters learned lessons in blood that the next generation needs to know. You can teach them, should teach them. Kate's hand unconsciously touched the ring under her shirt. I don't know if I'm ready for that, sir. I don't think readiness is the issue. I think you're afraid that moving forward means leaving David behind. It doesn't. Honoring his memory means doing the work you're both called to do. He'd want you teaching, saving lives, making sure his sacrifice and yours meant something. The words hit deeper than Kate wanted to admit. She'd been treading water for 5 years, maintaining but not advancing, surviving but not living. The idea of stepping back into a formal role, of being visible again, terrified her. But Aldridge was right. David would have wanted this. He'd always pushed her to be more, to use her gifts, to lead. What would the position entail? Designing and teaching a 12-week course for special operations personnel across all branches. Rangers, SEALs, Force Recon, Delta candidates. You'd have a staff of 4 assistant instructors, full autonomy on curriculum, and direct access to me for anything you need. And Lieutenant Holloway? Aldridge smiled slightly. He'll be your first intensive student, 8 weeks, one-on-one, before the formal course begins. Consider it a pilot program. If you can take an arrogant SEAL and turn him into a quiet professional, you can teach anyone. Holloway had the grace to look embarrassed. Kate was silent for a long moment, weighing the decision. Safety versus purpose, invisibility versus impact, the comfortable routine of the past 5 years versus the terrifying possibility of something more. I accept, she said finally, on one condition. Name it. The course includes a mandatory module on humility and tactical patience. Not just shooting mechanics, the mental game, the discipline that keeps you alive when skill isn't enough. Done. Aldridge stood, extending his hand. Welcome back to the fight, Sergeant Major. The rank hit Kate like electricity. Sergeant Major. The promotion she'd turned down when she left active duty. Sir, I'm not. You are now. Effective immediately. The paperwork's already processed. I had it ready the day you took that contractor job. Been waiting 5 years for you to be ready to accept it. Kate took his hand, feeling the weight of the rank settle under her shoulders like familiar armor. Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank in the Army, a position of leadership and responsibility that she'd run from once and was now accepting again. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, just do the work. Aldridge turned to Holloway. Lieutenant, you report to Sergeant Major Brennan at 0500 tomorrow. You'll be living at the range facility for the next 8 weeks. No contact with your team except emergencies. This is total immersion. Understood? Yes, sir. Good. Dismissed. They left the office together, walking in silence across the compound. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Fort Bragg at dusk had its own beauty, harsh and practical, but beautiful nonetheless. Sergeant Major, Holloway said finally, testing the rank. It suits you. We'll see if you still think that after 8 weeks. What will the training be like? Kate stopped, turning to face him directly. Week 1, I break everything you think you know. Week 2 through 4, I teach you to see. Week 5 and 6, I teach you to think. Week 7 and 8, we put it all together. By the end, you'll either be a completely different operator or you'll hate me. Possibly both. My father went through this with Colonel Aldridge, and it made him into the man you admired. That should tell you something. Holloway nodded slowly. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. I might not answer. The man you lost, Captain Morgan. How do you keep going after that? Kate was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the world in fire. You don't get over it, you get through it. Every day you wake up and you make a choice. Honor their memory by continuing the work or dishonor it by giving up. David believed in what we did, believed it mattered. Stopping would mean his death was for nothing. I won't allow that. That takes incredible strength. No, it takes incredible stubbornness. I'm too stubborn to quit. She managed a small, tired smile. Besides, he'd be pissed if I wasted the skills he helped me develop. David was practical like that. They walked a bit further in comfortable silence. At the fork where their paths diverged, Kate toward the contractor housing, Holloway toward the SEAL team barracks, they paused. 0500, Kate reminded him. Don't be late. I won't be. And Holloway, bring photos of your father, from his service. I want to see the man Colonel Aldridge trained. It'll help me understand how to train you. Holloway's expression shifted, something vulnerable and grateful crossing his face. I will. Thank you, Sergeant Major. Kate watched him walk away, this arrogant young SEAL who'd been humbled and was now willing to learn. She saw echoes of herself in him, the pride, the desire to prove worth, the fear of inadequacy hidden under swagger. Maybe Aldridge was right. Maybe she could teach this. Maybe the lessons learned in blood and grief could be passed on in a way that saved lives, that made the next generation better prepared for the darkness they'd face. She touched the ring around her neck one more time. Looks like I'm getting back in the game, David. Hope you approve. The wind carried no answer, but she didn't need one. She knew what he'd say. He'd tell her to stop talking and start doing. He'd remind her that the best way to honor the fallen was to ensure fewer people join them. She turned toward her quarters, already planning the 8-week curriculum in her head. Colonel Aldridge had given her a gift, the chance to mean something again, to be more than just a ghost maintaining equipment on a range. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, she would start building the next generation of quiet professionals. Tomorrow, Catherine Brennan would step fully back into the light. But tonight, she would sit with her memories of David and let herself feel the full weight of the past 5 years. The grief, the loss, the slow, painful journey from devastation to purpose. She owed him that. She owed herself that. And then, tomorrow, she would teach a young SEAL lieutenant the hardest lesson any warrior ever learns. That strength without humility is just weakness waiting to be exposed, and that the deadliest weapon any operator possesses is the quiet confidence that comes from having nothing left to prove. The sun completed its descent below the horizon, and Fort Bragg settled into night. Somewhere in the darkness, a new chapter was beginning. 8 weeks could break a man or rebuild him. Lieutenant Marcus Holloway was about to discover which category he fell into. The first morning arrived with the inevitability of dawn. 0500 hours, and Holloway stood outside Range 7 in the pre-dawn darkness, his rifle case at his feet, a duffel bag containing 8 weeks' worth of gear slung over his shoulder. He'd barely slept, his mind churning through everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. The humiliation, the impossible shot, the revelation of who Catherine Brennan really was. His father's story told by Colonel Aldridge with the weight of hard-earned wisdom, all of it had conspired to strip away the comfortable certainty he'd built his identity around, leaving behind something raw and uncertain. Kate emerged from the range control building carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one without ceremony, then nodded toward the range, stretching out before them in the gray pre-dawn light. First lesson, she said, put your rifle down and step away from it. Holloway hesitated. Sergeant Major, I thought, you thought we'd start shooting. We're not. For the next 72 hours, you don't touch a weapon. First, you learn to see. She led him to a position overlooking the range, a small observation platform that provided a clear view of the entire complex. The light was changing now, the sun not yet visible, but its approach announced by the gradual transformation of the sky from black to navy to the pale blue of early morning. Sit, Kate commanded, Tell me what you see. Holloway sat, feeling foolish. I see a rifle range. Target stands at various distances. The control tower. Some buildings. You see objects. I asked what you see. Try again. He looked harder, trying to understand what she wanted. I see equipment positioned for training, sight lines, fields of fire. Better, but you're still thinking tactically. I want you to see the environment, the way the light changes, how shadows move, where heat accumulates, how wind patterns form and shift. You're going to sit here for the next 6 hours and just observe. You'll write down everything you notice, every change, every pattern, every detail. 6 hours of watching a range? Kate's expression didn't change. Your father did 8. He complained less. But then he was Navy, so complaining came naturally. Despite himself, Holloway almost smiled. Colonel Aldridge told you that? Your father told me that. Met him once about 3 years before he died. He came to Fort Bragg to observe a training evolution. We talked about his time with the colonel. He said those first days of just watching nearly drove him insane. Then something clicked, and he started seeing things he'd never noticed before. That's when his shooting transformed from mechanical skill to true art. She handed him a notebook and pen. Write, observe, learn to be still. I'll be back at 1100. Kate walked away, leaving Holloway alone with his thoughts, and a notebook and 6 hours of enforced patience. He wanted to protest, to argue that this was a waste of time, that he needed to be shooting, practicing, improving his mechanics. But the memory of his father's journey, the parallel nature of this training, kept him silent. So he watched. At first it was torture. His mind wandered, his body fidgeted. He checked his watch every few minutes, convinced hours had passed when only minutes had ticked by. But gradually, reluctantly, he began to actually see. The way morning light hit the target stands at different angles depending on their position. How shadows created false readings on distance and depth. The patterns in which birds moved across the range, avoiding certain areas, congregating in others. The subtle shifts in wind direction, marked by the movement of grass and dust. He wrote it all down, his observations growing more detailed as the hours passed. By the time Kate returned, his hand was cramping, and the notebook was filled with notes that surprised him with their specificity. She reviewed his work in silence, flipping through pages with an expression that revealed nothing. Finally, she looked up. Good start. Tomorrow you'll do it again, but this time you'll predict. You'll write down what you think will happen next based on the patterns you observed today. We'll see how accurate your predictions are. This is sniper training. This is observer training. Snipers work in pairs, shooter and spotter. The spotter is often more important than the shooter. They read the environment, call the wind, spot the fall of shot, manage the tactical situation. You can't be a complete operator if you can't observe properly. Your father learned this, so will you. The days began to blur together into a rhythm of observation and instruction. Holloway watched the range for hours, learning to read wind in the movement of grass, to gauge temperature by the behavior of heat mirage, to predict weather changes by the color and movement of clouds. He learned that shooting was only 20% of precision marksmanship. The other 80% was reading the environment. On day 4, Kate finally let him touch his rifle, but not to shoot. Disassemble it, she instructed, completely, every component, then reassemble it. You have 30 minutes. Holloway had done this hundreds of times. He could break down and reassemble his weapon blindfolded. He finished in 12 minutes, confident and precise. Kate examined his work, then without warning, swept her arm across the table, scattering components across the concrete. Again, but this time I want you to understand each piece. Not just know its function, but understand why it's designed that way. What engineering problem it solves. What compromises were made in its creation. This rifle is a tool. You need to know it like a craftsman knows their tools. She scattered it 3 more times that day. Each time she asked different questions. Why this bolt design instead of another? Why free-float the barrel? What's the actual purpose of the muzzle brake beyond recoil reduction? How does the trigger mechanism achieve its specific pull weight? Holloway realized he'd been using tools he didn't truly understand. He knew what they did, but not why or how. Kate was forcing him to think deeper, to move beyond rote memorization into genuine comprehension. Week 2 brought live fire, but not in any form Holloway expected. Kate set up targets at 300 meters, easy range for any competent shooter, and gave him a single round. One shot, she said, make it count. But before you shoot, I want you to walk me through your entire decision process. Every calculation, every observation, every adjustment. Explain it like you're teaching someone who's never fired a rifle before. Holloway settled into position, beginning his analysis. Wind is approximately 4 miles per hour from the east. Temperature is 76 degrees. Humidity appears moderate based on the clarity of the air. Target range is 300 meters. With a .308 round, I'm looking at minimal drop, maybe 6 inches. Wind drift will be approximately 2 inches right. I'll hold center mass and let the natural point of aim. Stop, Kate interrupted. You're reciting formulas. I want understanding. Why does temperature matter? Explain the actual physics. Temperature affects air density. Warmer air is less dense, so there's less resistance to the bullet, which means the bullet will impact slightly higher than in cold air. How much higher at this range with current conditions? Holloway paused, realizing he didn't actually know. He'd always used ballistic calculators or relied on general rules of thumb. Kate was forcing him to understand the underlying principles. I don't know the exact calculation. Then figure it out. You have a calculator, the ballistic coefficient of your ammunition, and atmospheric data. Do the math. She made him work through it step by step, deriving the answer from first principles rather than relying on pre-programmed solutions. It took him 20 minutes to make the calculations he'd normally pull from an app in seconds. But when he finally pressed the trigger and the round hit exactly where he'd predicted, the satisfaction was different, deeper. He'd understood it, not just executed it. Every shot that week was the same process, slow, methodical, thoughtful. Kate refused to let him fire until he could articulate not just what he was doing, but why it worked and what could go wrong. She was building a foundation of understanding that went beyond muscle memory into genuine expertise. Colonel Aldridge visited at the end of week 2. He watched Kate put Holloway through his paces, nodding with satisfaction as the young SEAL worked through complex ballistic problems with increasing confidence. He's learning, Aldridge observed to Kate during a break. He's smart. Once his ego got out of the way, his brain started working properly. Reminds me of his father. James was the same way, brilliant once he stopped trying to prove how brilliant he was. Aldridge pulled an envelope from his jacket. Speaking of which, I brought something for you to give him. James wrote this letter about 15 years ago, asked me to hold on to it until the right moment. I think this is that moment. Kate took the envelope, noting the faded ink on the outside. To my son, when he needs it most, was written in a strong, decisive hand. You think now is the right time? I think he's at the point where he'll actually hear what his father has to say. 2 weeks ago, he would have read it through his ego. Now he might read it with his heart. That evening, after the day's training concluded, Kate handed Holloway the envelope. He stared at it like it might explode, recognizing his father's handwriting immediately. Where did you get this? Colonel Aldridge. Your father wrote it years ago. Asked him to give it to you when the time was right. Holloway's hands shook slightly as he opened it. Kate gave him privacy, walking away to give him space with his father's words. She didn't need to read the letter to know what it probably said. Men like James Holloway understood the journey their sons would need to make because they'd made the same journey themselves. The next morning, Holloway arrived at 0500 with red-rimmed eyes, but a different energy. Something had shifted in him overnight. The last vestiges of defensive arrogance had been burned away, leaving behind something more solid and true. "Thank you," he said to Kate, "for the letter, for all of this." What did he say? That pride was the enemy of excellence, that he'd made every mistake I was making and it nearly cost him everything, that the operators he respected most were the quietest ones, the ones who had nothing to prove because they'd already proven everything that mattered. Holloway paused, emotion thick in his voice. He said if I was reading this, it meant I'd finally been humbled enough to learn. He was right. Week 3 through 6 were intense immersion in every aspect of precision shooting. Kate taught him to read mirage, to use weather patterns for long-range prediction, to calculate holds for extreme angles and altitudes. But more than the technical skills, she taught him patience. She made him hold positions for hours, watching distant points without firing, learning to become part of the landscape. She taught him the meditation of stillness, the way time became different when you were fully present in a moment. She showed him how to manage pain and discomfort, to remain mission-focused even when every muscle screamed for relief. "Afghanistan, 2019, she told him one day as they lay side by side in shooting positions, observing a distant target neither was allowed to engage yet. "I held position for 14 hours. My team was compromised. David, Captain Morgan, was hit in the first exchange. He died in my arms while I was calling for extraction." Holloway remained silent, knowing this story was a gift, an opening of wounds that had never fully healed. "I couldn't leave position. If I did, the rest of my team would die. So I stayed, held security, eliminated targets as they appeared, waited for help to arrive. Every minute felt like a year. Every second I wanted to quit, to run, to scream, but I stayed." How did you endure it? By making it small. Not 14 hours, just the next minute, then the next one after that. You can endure anything if you make it small enough. That's the secret to all of this. Reduce everything to the fundamentals. The next breath, the next observation, the next decision. String enough of those together, and you survive what seemed impossible. The lesson went deeper than shooting. Holloway was learning the mental discipline that separated true operators from technically skilled shooters. He was learning that the weapon between his ears was more important than the one in his hands. Week 7 brought live scenarios. Kate designed complex problems that required him to integrate everything he'd learned. Moving targets at unknown distances in variable conditions. Time-sensitive engagements with minimal information. Situations where the right answer was not to shoot at all. She pushed him hard, creating stress and pressure, watching how he responded. The old Holloway would have rushed, would have taken marginal shots to prove his capability. This new version paused, breathed, made careful assessments, and sometimes had the wisdom to acknowledge when a shot was beyond his current skill. "That's growth," Kate told him, after he'd declined a shot he couldn't make with certainty. "Knowing your limits isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The warriors who get people killed are the ones who don't know where their capability ends." On the final day of week 8, Kate set up a graduation exercise. One shot, 1,800 meters, wind gusting to 15 miles per hour, heat mirage creating significant distortion. The same distance she'd shot for the VIP demonstration, under worse conditions. "You've been training for 8 weeks, she said. "Your father trained for 8 weeks before Desert Storm. This is your final test. Not to prove you're perfect, but to demonstrate you understand the process. Make the shot or miss it, but show me you know what you're doing and why." Holloway took his time. He observed wind for 10 minutes, watching patterns, noting the inconsistencies. He calculated atmospheric effects using the principles Kate had drilled into him. He set up his position with meticulous care, checking and rechecking every variable. When he finally settled behind the rifle, his breathing was controlled, his mind clear. He wasn't thinking about proving himself or living up to his father's legacy. He was simply executing the fundamentals, stringing together all the small things he'd learned into one complete action. The shot broke clean, 1,800 meters away. After nearly 3 seconds of flight time, the round impacted 6 inches right of center mass. Not perfect, but respectable under the conditions. Kate nodded. Good shooting. More importantly, good process. You missed your wind call by about 1 mile per hour, which is why you impacted right. But your methodology was sound. That's what matters. Technical perfection comes with more practice. Understanding can't be taught. It has to be earned. You earned it. Holloway cleared his rifle, a smile breaking across his face. Not the cocky grin he'd worn 8 weeks ago, but something genuine and hard-won. Thank you, Sergeant Major, for everything. Thank your father. This was his journey. I just helped you walk the same path. Colonel Aldridge appeared from the control tower, walking toward them with measured steps. He'd watched the entire graduation exercise from above, and his expression carried approval. Lieutenant Holloway, he said formally, congratulations on completing the Advanced Precision Marksmanship Intensive. I'm told you're a different operator than the one who arrived 8 weeks ago. Yes, sir. I hope I am. Your father would be proud, not of the shot, though that was respectable, proud that you were humble enough to learn, strong enough to change, and wise enough to recognize what matters. Aldridge extended his hand. Welcome to the ranks of quiet professionals. The handshake carried weight, the passing of something intangible but vital from one generation to the next. 6 months later, Fort Bragg looked exactly the same but felt entirely different to Kate Brennan. She'd settled into her role as Sergeant Major and head instructor with a completeness that surprised her. The first official 12-week Advanced Precision Marksmanship course had just graduated 15 students, Rangers, SEALs, Force Recon Marines, and 2 Delta candidates. All of them had been transformed by the curriculum she designed, the methodology she'd refined through Holloway's intensive training. The course had gained a reputation. Students called it brutal, transformative, the hardest training many of them had experienced. But the results spoke for themselves. Graduates were performing at levels that exceeded all previous benchmarks. More importantly, they were performing with humility and wisdom, understanding that skill without judgment was dangerous. The range itself had been formally renamed during a small ceremony attended by base leadership. It was now called Brennan Range, with a brass plaque mounted at the entrance. Kate had protested the honor, but Aldridge had been insistent. Legacies matter, he'd told her. You're building something that will outlast both of us. It deserves to be acknowledged. The plaque was simple, elegant. Brennan Range, where competence requires no announcement. The phrase had become something of a motto among special operations personnel, a reminder of the values Kate embodied. Master Chief Marcus Holloway had become one of her most valuable assets. He'd returned to his SEAL team a changed operator, and the transformation had been noticed. He'd been promoted to Master Chief and assigned as an instructor at Naval Special Warfare Center, where he taught Kate's methodology to incoming SEALs. They collaborated frequently, refining techniques, sharing lessons learned. On a cool morning in late autumn, Kate stood at the firing line supervising a new class of students. Among them was a young woman, Lieutenant Rebecca Thorne, 26 years old, an Army officer who'd fought for and earned her place in Ranger School. She was facing the same skepticism Kate had encountered years before, the same dismissive attitudes that assumed gender determined capability. Kate watched Rebecca handle her rifle with growing competence, saw the focus and determination that reminded her of herself at that age. During a break, she approached the young lieutenant. Good shooting today, Thorne. Thank you, Sergeant Major. Rebecca's posture was parade ground perfect, but her eyes carried exhaustion. Though I'm sure you've noticed I'm still struggling with wind calls over 1,200 meters. Wind reading is the hardest skill to master. Took me 3 years before I felt truly confident. Kate paused, studying the younger woman. You're also dealing with extra pressure the male students don't face. I see how they look at you, the skepticism. Rebecca's jaw tightened. I can handle it, Sergeant Major. I know you can, but you shouldn't have to handle it alone. When I went through Ranger School, I didn't have mentors who understood what I was facing. I'm offering to be that for you. Extra instruction if you want it. Not because you need remediation, but because excellence deserves investment. Something shifted in Rebecca's expression. Relief, gratitude, recognition that she wasn't alone in this fight. I'd appreciate that, Sergeant Major. Thank you. Over the following weeks, Kate worked with Rebecca in the early mornings before the regular class began. She taught not just shooting mechanics, but the mental resilience required to perform under scrutiny. How to let skepticism fuel focus rather than create doubt. How to prove capability through consistent excellence rather than defensive anger. Rebecca flourished under the attention. Her scores climbed steadily until she was competing for the top position in the class rankings. More importantly, her confidence solidified into the quiet certainty that marked true expertise. The parallel wasn't lost on Kate. She was passing forward what Colonel Aldridge had given her: mentorship, wisdom, the belief that capability mattered more than category. The teaching tradition stretched backward through decades and forward into an uncertain future. On graduation day for that class, Rebecca Thorne stood second in overall rankings, missing first place by a single point. But when the scores were announced, the male student who'd placed first, a ranger named Patterson, who'd started the course with visible skepticism about Rebecca's presence, approached her publicly. "Lieutenant Thorne," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled students and instructors, "you pushed me harder than I've ever been pushed. You made me better by refusing to accept anything less than excellence from yourself. Thank you for that." He extended his hand. Rebecca shook it, and the gesture carried recognition that transcended any rankings or scores. Mutual respect between warriors, earned through shared hardship and demonstrated capability. Kate watched the exchange from the instructor platform, feeling something warm expand in her chest. This was the legacy, not individual achievements, but the culture being built one interaction at a time. A culture where competence was respected regardless of who possessed it. Colonel Aldridge stood beside her, also watching. He'd aged visibly over the past year, 70 now, his retirement approaching with the inevitability of seasons changing. But his eyes were sharp as ever, missing nothing. "You're building something good here, Kate." "We're building it, sir. This is as much your legacy as mine." "Maybe, but I'll be gone soon. You'll carry it forward, along with Holloway and Thorne and all the others you're training. That's how it works. Each generation teaches the next, and the knowledge compounds." Kate felt the weight of that responsibility, but also its rightness. This was her purpose now, not individual glory or personal achievement, but the multiplication of excellence through teaching. 2 years after that first conversation with Holloway on the range, Fort Bragg hosted a ceremony that brought together 3 generations of warriors. Colonel Richard Aldridge was officially retiring after 47 years of service, a career that spanned from the Cold War through the War on Terror, from Mogadishu to Afghanistan. The event was held on Brennan Range, at Aldridge's request. Chairs had been set up for dignitaries, but the real audience was the hundreds of operators who trained under him, been mentored by him, been shaped by his wisdom. Kate stood in dress uniform, sergeant major rank gleaming on her collar, as one of the speakers. Beside her on the platform was Master Chief Holloway, also in dress uniform, and Captain Rebecca Thorne, recently promoted and now serving as a company commander in the 75th Regiment. When Kate stepped to the microphone, she looked out over the assembled warriors and saw the lineage of warriors made visible. Young students she was currently training, recent graduates beginning their operational careers, seasoned operators who'd been through her courses and were now teaching others. All of them connected through the methodology Aldridge had pioneered: and Kate had refined. Colonel Aldridge taught me that true strength requires no announcement, she began, her voice carrying across the range. That the deadliest operators are often the quietest. That humility and excellence are not contradictory, they're complementary. She paused, letting her gaze find Aldridge in the front row. He sat with perfect posture despite his age, his expression neutral, but his eyes warm with pride. He also taught me that our individual accomplishments matter less than what we pass forward. Every shot I've made, every mission I've completed, every award I've received, all of it means nothing if I don't invest that knowledge in the next generation. That's the real measure of a warrior's worth. Not what they achieve, but what they enable others to achieve. She gestured to Holloway and Thorne. Master Chief Holloway was an arrogant SEAL lieutenant who needed to be broken down and rebuilt. He let that happen. He had the courage to admit he didn't know everything and the humility to learn. Now he's teaching others that same lesson. Captain Thorne faced skepticism and prejudice, but she let her competence speak louder than any argument. Now she's commanding Rangers and showing them what excellence looks like, regardless of who embodies it. Kate's voice strengthened. This is Colonel Aldridge's legacy, not the missions he completed or the awards he earned, though those are substantial. His legacy is us. Everyone he trained, everyone we train, everyone they'll train in years to come. The legacy extending forward through time, making each generation more capable than the last. She looked directly at Aldridge. Sir, on behalf of every operator you've shaped, every life you've saved through the knowledge you shared, every warrior you've inspired to be better, thank you. We'll carry forward what you built. The applause was thunderous, but Aldridge seemed to barely hear it. His eyes were locked on Kate, and in that moment, something passed between them. The acknowledgement that the work would continue, that the legacy was secure, that he could rest knowing his life's effort had not been in vain. When he stood to give his own remarks, his voice was steady despite his age. I'm not good at speeches, he began, which caused knowing laughter from those who'd heard his brutally direct training lectures. So I'll be brief. 47 years in uniform taught me one fundamental truth. No one does this alone. Every success I've had was built on the sacrifices of those who came before me and those who served beside me. He gestured to the range spreading out behind him. This facility, this program, this methodology, it's not mine, it's ours. Sergeant Major Brennan took what I taught her and made it better. She's training operators I could never have reached, solving problems I didn't know existed. That's evolution. That's progress. That's how we win. His gaze swept across the assembled operators. The fight continues, the threats change, but the need for quiet professionals remains constant. I'm leaving this in capable hands. Trust your instructors. Respect the knowledge they're sharing. Have the humility to learn and the courage to admit what you don't know. That's how you survive. That's how you excel. He stepped back from the microphone, and the base commander presented him with a retirement shadow box. A framed collection of his career highlights, ribbons and photos and memorabilia spanning nearly 5 decades. Aldridge accepted it with a salute, then turned and walked directly to Kate. Without words, he handed her a small wooden box. She opened it to find his original instructor badge from the Special Operations School, worn and tarnished from years of use. This was given to me by my instructor in '73, Aldridge said quietly. Now it's yours. Keep the tradition unbroken. Kate's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. I will, sir. I promise. They embraced briefly, the gesture carrying the weight of years and shared understanding. Then Aldridge moved through the crowd, shaking hands, receiving thanks, slowly saying goodbye to the life he'd lived for nearly half a century. The ceremony concluded as the sun set over Fort Bragg, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Kate of Afghanistan, of all the sunsets watched from hostile positions in foreign lands. The beauty and the danger always intertwined, impossible to separate. 3 years later, Kate stood in almost the same spot, but the context had shifted again. She was now overseeing the expansion of the Advanced Precision Marksmanship program to include satellite courses at bases across the country. Her methodology had been formally adopted by SOCOM as the standard for all precision rifle instruction. The program she'd built had grown beyond Fort Bragg to become a cornerstone of special operations training nationwide. Lieutenant Rebecca Thorne was now Major Thorne, serving as the deputy director of the program, helping manage the growing network of instructors and facilities. Master Chief Holloway had retired from active duty and joined as a senior civilian instructor, his expertise too valuable to lose when his military career ended. The three of them stood watching a new class go through qualifications, seeing the latest generation of operators demonstrate the skills and mindset that had become synonymous with Brennan Range graduates. Colonel Aldridge would be proud, Holloway observed. This has grown beyond anything we imagined 5 years ago. He knew, Kate replied. He told me once that good ideas grow if you plant them in fertile ground. We've been planting seeds for years. Now we're seeing the harvest. Rebecca checked her watch. We have the quarterly review with SOCOM leadership at 1400. They want to discuss expansion to 2 more bases. Kate nodded. The program's success had created demands she couldn't have imagined 5 years ago. Bases across the country were requesting the curriculum, sending their best instructors to be trained in the methodology. How many applicants for the next instructor course? Kate asked. 47. We can only take 12. Rebecca's expression showed the familiar frustration of success. Every special operations unit wants their people trained in the Brennan method. The Aldridge-Brennan method, Kate corrected quietly. He started this. I just kept it going. Holloway joined them, wiping sweat from a training session. The new SEAL class is sharp. That cocky lieutenant, he's already starting to see his blind spots. Give him 3 weeks. He'll be a different operator. Like someone else I know, Kate said with the ghost of a smile. Holloway laughed. Touché, Sergeant Major, though I maintain I wasn't that bad. You were worse, Rebecca and Kate said simultaneously, then shared a look of perfect understanding. The easy camaraderie between them was the result of years working together, of shared purpose and mutual respect earned through demonstrated competence. They were colleagues, mentors to the next generation, and in a way that transcended military hierarchy, friends. The SOCOM meeting, Kate said, returning to business. What's their primary concern? Budget and scalability. They want to know if we can train instructors fast enough to meet demand without diluting quality. Kate considered this. It was the eternal tension, growth versus excellence. Push too fast and standards dropped. Move too slow and operators died from inadequate training. Tell them we'll expand to 10 bases within 3 years, but no faster. Each new facility gets a senior instructor from our existing program for the first year. No compromises on standards, ever. Rebecca made notes. They'll want timelines and metrics. Then we'll give them timelines and metrics. But the bottom line doesn't change. We train warriors who come home alive and complete their missions. That's the only metric that matters. The sun was climbing higher, the day's heat building. Kate watched the students on the range, their movements still uncertain but improving with each iteration. Learning, growing, becoming. This was the work. Not glamorous, not headline-grabbing, but essential. Every student who graduated carried knowledge forward into dark places. Every lesson taught was a potential life saved. Colonel Aldridge used to say that teaching was the highest form of service, Kate said quietly. That operators who fought and died had given their lives once, but operators who taught gave their knowledge 1,000 times over, saving lives they'd never meet. Sounds like something he'd say, Holloway agreed. He was right, too. The operators I've trained at Naval Special Warfare, they're out there right now, using what I taught them, what you taught me, what the colonel taught both of us. The knowledge multiplies. Kate touched the instructor badge in her pocket, the one Aldridge had given her. The metal was warm from her body heat, worn smooth from years of handling. She carried it everywhere, a physical reminder of the promise she'd made. Keep the tradition unbroken. She was keeping that promise. 5 years after Colonel Aldridge's retirement, Kate received word that he'd passed away. Heart failure, peaceful, in his sleep at age 74. He lived long enough to see the program he'd started flourish beyond anything he'd imagined, but not long enough to see how far it would ultimately reach. The funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. The attendance was staggering. Hundreds of operators whose lives he'd touched, whose careers he'd shaped, whose understanding of what it meant to be a warrior had been fundamentally altered by his teaching. Kate stood in dress uniform, her face composed but her heart breaking. Beside her stood Holloway and Rebecca Thorne, and dozens of other graduates who'd become instructors themselves. The lineage of warriors made visible in human form. When it came time for personal remembrances, Kate stepped forward. She looked at the flag-draped casket and felt the full weight of everything Aldridge had given her. "Colonel Aldridge taught me how to shoot," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath. "But more importantly, he taught me how to think, how to see, how to understand that excellence and humility aren't contradictory, they're inseparable." She paused, gathering herself. "After I lost David, after my world fell apart, the colonel could have let me disappear into grief. Instead, he gave me purpose. He showed me that the best way to honor the fallen is to serve the living, to pass forward what we've learned so that others might survive what killed those we loved." Her eyes swept across the assembled mourners. He's gone now, but what he built, what we're all part of, continues. Every operator trained in his methodology carries his legacy. Every life saved by their skill is his victory. Every generation that learns from us extends his influence forward through time. Kate's voice strengthened with conviction. This isn't an ending, it's a continuation. We carry forward what he started. We teach what he taught us. We maintain the standard he established. That's how we honor him. Not with grief, but with excellence. Not with words, but with action. She saluted the casket, holding the gesture as tears finally broke free and tracked down her face. The assembled operators saluted with her, hundreds of hands raised in final tribute to a man who'd shaped them all. The burial detail fired their volleys, the sharp cracks echoing across Arlington. A bugler played taps, the mournful notes carrying across the endless rows of white headstones. The flag was folded with geometric precision and presented to Aldridge's widow, who accepted it with the dignified grief of someone who'd known this day would come and had prepared as best anyone could. After the ceremony, as people began to disperse, Kate stood alone by the grave. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the instructor badge Aldridge had given her years before. For a moment, she considered leaving it with him, a gesture of respect and finality. But no, he'd given it to her to keep the tradition unbroken, to pass forward when her time came. She returned it to her pocket and instead placed her hand on the temporary marker that would eventually be replaced with a permanent headstone. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, "for everything. I'll keep the promise. I'll maintain the standard. Rest easy." The wind carried her words away across the cemetery, across the thousands of warriors buried there, across the decades and the distance between who she'd been and who she'd become. She walked away from the grave with purpose in her stride. There was work to do, students to train, knowledge to pass forward, a legacy to maintain. 10 years after that first confrontation on Range 7, Fort Bragg looked both familiar and transformed. The Advanced Precision Marksmanship program had expanded to include permanent facilities at 8 bases nationwide. Kate had been promoted to Command Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank in the Army, and served as the senior advisor for all special operations training programs. She was 40 years old now, her blonde hair showing the first threads of gray, her face carrying lines earned through years of responsibility and leadership. But her eyes remained the same, pale blue and absolutely certain. The original Brennan Range had been expanded and upgraded, now serving as the flagship facility for the national program. A new building housed classrooms and offices, with Colonel Aldridge's name prominently featured on the dedication plaque. On a spring morning, Kate stood on the observation platform where she'd once made Holloway sit for hours, learning to see. Below, a new class was going through their first day of training. Among them was a young SEAL lieutenant who'd arrived with swagger and confidence, convinced he already knew everything that mattered. Kate smiled slightly, recognizing the pattern. She'd assigned Master Chief Holloway to be his primary instructor, knowing the former arrogant SEAL could best teach the current one. Rebecca Thorne, now Lieutenant Colonel Thorne, approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Kate and stood beside her, also watching the new students. "Think this one will learn?" Rebecca asked, nodding toward the cocky SEAL. "They all learn eventually. Some just need harder lessons than others. Holloway seems to enjoy teaching the arrogant ones, because he knows exactly what they're feeling and exactly what they need to hear. He's been there. That makes him the perfect instructor for that type." They stood in comfortable silence, sipping coffee, watching the eternal cycle of students arriving confident and leaving humble but competent. "Colonel Aldridge would be proud of all this," Rebecca said finally. "The program, the expansion, the impact we're having. He knew it would grow. He planted seeds in fertile ground, then trusted us to tend them." Kate paused, then added quietly, "I miss him, miss his wisdom, miss having someone who understood the full arc of this work. You have us now, different perspective but the same commitment." Kate nodded, feeling the truth of that. The tradition continued, each generation teaching the next, the knowledge compounding, the legacy expanding. That was the real victory, not individual achievement, but sustained excellence passed forward through time. A young female Ranger candidate was struggling with her rifle setup, and Kate watched as one of her assistant instructors, a graduate from 3 years prior, patiently showed her the proper technique. The instructor had once been in that exact position, struggling and uncertain, and now she was teaching others. The multiplication of knowledge, the compounding of excellence, the tradition unbroken. That evening, after the day's training concluded, Kate stood alone on the range as the sun set. She touched the ring she still wore on a chain around her neck, feeling the familiar weight of memory and love. "I'm still here, David," she whispered to the gathering darkness. "Still fighting, still serving, still making it count." The wind carried no answer, but she didn't need one. She knew what he'd say. He'd tell her she was doing good work. He'd remind her that legacy matters more than glory. He'd urge her to keep teaching, keep building, keep maintaining the standard. She turned and walked toward the headquarters building, but paused at the entrance. From here, she could see the entire complex, the expanded ranges, the new training facilities, the Aldridge Memorial Building where young operators studied ballistics and wind reading, and the mental discipline that separated professionals from pretenders. Lights were coming on across the base as evening settled. In the barracks, students were cleaning weapons and reviewing the day's lessons. In the instructor quarters, Holloway and Rebecca and a dozen others were planning tomorrow's training, refining techniques, discussing how to reach that one struggling student. The work continued, always. Kate's phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. "SGM Brennan, just completed my first solo mission as team leader. 12 successful engagements, 0 casualties. Everything I learned on your range. Thank you for saving my life before I needed saving. CPT Alvarez, 2021 graduate." She read it twice, feeling the weight of those words. This was why. This was the purpose. Not awards or promotions or recognition, but messages like this. Lives saved, missions completed, warriors coming home. She typed back, "You saved your own life by being willing to learn. Pass it forward. KB." The phone went back in her pocket. She looked up at the darkening sky, at the first stars appearing. David had loved this time of day, that transition between light and dark, the moment when the world paused before night took hold. "We did good work today," she whispered to him, to the memory, to the promise she'd kept for 12 years. "Same again tomorrow." The wind carried her words away, and with them, the last of the day's wait. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new opportunities to pass forward what Aldridge had given her, what David had died believing in. The mission continued because it had to. The legacy endured because warriors like Kate refused to let it fade. The silent professionals carried on because someone had to teach the next generation how to survive the darkness. Catherine Brennan, Command Sergeant Major, United States Army, walked into the headquarters building. Above the door, a brass plaque caught the last light of day. "Brennan Range, where competence requires no announcement." And beneath it, newer, smaller, dedicated to the memory of Colonel Richard T. Aldridge, who taught us that the deadliest warriors are the quietest, and that true strength never needs to announce itself. The door closed behind her. The range settled into night. And somewhere, on 100 ranges across the country, instructors trained in her methodology were teaching the next shot, the next lesson, the next warrior who would carry the knowledge forward into an uncertain future. The tradition remained unbroken.